Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Today I got a fun and interesting episode for you guys this Friday because about 6 to 8 months ago I talked about Konami Viper MAME emulation progressing a bit forward to the point where you could get into and play maybe one game if you were lucky. And you know I talk about the Konami Viper hardware on the channel. I collect a lot of it and I've done a lot of original game captures off real hardware. But last week one of the members of my Discord, I'll leave credit below because his name is hard to pronounce, was able to get controls working in more of the games, so you're now able to play basically all of the racing games on Konami Viper emulation via MAME. Do be aware that this is a special build of MAME. It'll be on my Discords under the Arcade Konami channel in the pins. And this is from Cool Pup right here. He's one of the members of my Discord that sent me over this footage to capture, and I'll let you know when you're watching my footage as well. Now do be aware that the initial footage you're seeing is not running at this frame rate. If you're actually playing it, it's a little bit of a capture trick to be able to get things to run at a better speed. I will show you what the real result is in just a moment. But for the longest time, none of these racing games were basically playable. There was no communication in the steering as far as the drivers for the emulator were concerned, so you could get into the game, maybe you could see the attract mode, but when it came time to actually controlling the vehicles, you had no controls wired in whatsoever. Now today, that is completely different. Obviously, there's still graphical glitches. This is not complete emulation yet, but the Konami Viper has a ton of awesome games. It is rare hardware that you rarely see in arcades anymore, so getting emulation further progressing is always a good thing. Now this is a direct capture from MAME that I got last evening. I am doing this with no frame skip on whatsoever on an i9-13900K processor. So basically I'm throwing about as much brute force at the game as I possibly can. And you will see on the actual emulation side of things, this is not yet running at full speed. You can get close in some spots, but other parts or effects are going to chug the engine down to almost a slideshow. And while that wouldn't be classified as something I would say is playable, it is a technological feat to get this far into the game, and it means that hopefully in the next year or two other people come along and look at Konami Viper and start cleaning up some of the other issues it has, because there is an absolute ton of games on this hardware that are so worth playing, and the hardware can be relatively delicate down to the fact that Motorola PowerPC CPU you see in the middle is not heat sinked on the boards, and a lot of these units will heat bake themselves to death due to poor heat management. Additionally, it does come with that classic Konami real-time clock battery back chip, so it will die and you need to reprogram to get the board working again, which normally isn't that big of an issue, but a couple of the games actually have serialization to a secondary chip on the board, so you have to actually get your custom serial number and put it into the real-time clock file, or else the game will never load again. So getting these things working under emulation is going to be super important for the long-term preservation of the Konami Viper library. Something like GTI Club 2 here is an absolutely awesome racing game. Kind of plays a little bit like San Francisco Rush mixed with California Speed, mixed with Beetle Adventure Racing on the Nintendo 64 in all the best ways possible. The entire GTI Club franchise is great, and for the most part they never got ported to home consoles. Yes, there was a Wii version and one on PS3 as well as an arcade remake, but these originals never really saw the light of day anywhere, and they are just a ton of fun to play. I have them in my collection. I'll try to do a GTI Club 2 capture soon. And you'll see here in the attract mode, most things work, but there's definitely some texture issues as well, loading up the wrong texture, so hopefully that can be looked at in the future and cleaned up as well. But for the most part, these games can now be at least experienced. I'm not saying played because the frame rate can be quite touchy, but you can jump in and see what could have been if you saw these in arcades back in the day, and that just means that we're getting closer to a point in time where you could classify most of these games as playable. But obviously I'm talking about the racing games right now. Warzade also works, but you cannot reload in the game yet, so you have to wait and die before you get a fresh clip of bullets in the game, which definitely wouldn't be classified as playable. But on the fun side of things, the sound emulation on the Konami Viper hardware seems to be near to perfect. Go ahead and listen for 45 seconds and get a sense of what this hardware actually sounded like, because for every visual glitch and slowdown the game has, it seems like the audio just 100% keeps up, and having owned a lot of this original hardware, I would say is relatively accurate to the real thing. So listen and I'll be right back.
Checkpoint. Extra time.
Honestly, it's pretty impressive just how good the sound emulation on the Konami Viper driver for MAME truly is. As you get further into a race here, again, you'll see some effects just don't work. Those blotches on the screen, those textures should be sun rays from the sun, or some textures that look like it actually has real-time reflections. Those are clearly not loading in correctly, so you end up in a situation where you get all of that strange texturing on the screen. Now moving over to a real capture of Thrill Drive 2, this is what the Konami Viper should look like in real gameplay. Strong frame rate, all of the effects work, the fog is there. That is because this is just running on the original PowerPC and the 3D effects hardware on board the Viper. And this is what we want to get as a situation in the future for Konami Viper emulation. So if you're at all interested in looking at it, definitely join that Discord. We have a channel specifically for Konami arcade hardware where people poke at this stuff all day long. Sometimes it's months and months and months before anyone figures out anything, but every once in a while you get a situation where suddenly a bunch of games that didn't have any controls in them whatsoever started to be controllable and playable by people, and that is always fun because these were not the most successful arcade games back in the day, even if they were a ton of fun. And a lot of times a game being good doesn't really lend itself to being a guaranteed success. There's plenty of arcade games and console games out there that review very well and end up absolutely bombing at the sales market, and a lot of the Konami Viper games feel to be the same sort of situation. And I'm sure for the most part many people have never played these games before, and I hope that that can change in the future. And that's why I always showcase these kind of evolutions in the emulation, because as much fun as playing something like Thrill Drive 2 is on real hardware, I understand and realize not many people are going to get the opportunity to do something like that. It costs a lot of money, and keeping the hardware alive can almost feel like a part-time job for me, trying to keep all my arcade boards functioning. Or something like Code 1 Dispatch right here, going over to MAME again. It now has controls, but you're going to see that the graphics have more issues here than on other games I've shown you, and that's just because it is a platform. Developers could use different functions and effects of the hardware, so obviously more of the functions on the graphic side for Viper were used here on Code 1 Dispatch compared to what you see in other games. Now this is what the game should look like on real hardware. This is my original hardware capture, and you can see the night and day difference. But Code 1 Dispatch is again one of those unicorn rare games where if you see it in an arcade, 100% sit down and put money into it, odds are you'll never see it again. It is absolutely fun. Arcade racing perfection and just over the top 10 out of 10 wildness, and that's what I love out of Konami in this genre. They just took arcade racing and dialed up all the intensity and just ran with it. So that is why it's so important that these games work, because a lot of people have never experienced them before. Something like GTI Club 2 here, again on my MAME capture, you can see what the game's trying to do, you can play it, but for some spots the frame rate is just going to get a little bit too raw, and in other spots it is going to be that slideshow. But as of a week ago, you couldn't even really turn the car in this game, you couldn't accelerate, you basically had no ability to do almost anything. And you'll see here as we come to this intersection, something is running, some command or function that absolutely just decimates the frame rate. But when we get past that intersection, it comes back up. So the question is this playable? And that's the hard part about classifications. It's either playable or not playable. I would say this is something you can experience, and I do wish experience was a classification in these emulation situations. I wouldn't say that every single game is playable, although you can play it. It's just not going to be playable to the point in time in which you can just have that pure fun you want without thinking about the fact that the game isn't 100% running as it was intended to. This is definitely something you should experience. You should go check it out. And for some games, stuff like GTI Club 2, you can get a full race in. You're just not going to be able to do it with the native frame rate, and you're going to get some texture and graphical glitches. And with X-Trail Racing here, you'll see again a little bit of weirdness in some of the effects. So if that gets dialed in eventually and some of the CPU emulation comes up to speed, this should be something that becomes playable for everyone, and that's all that really matters to me. There's so many incredible games on the Viper. I want you to play them all, and hopefully one day it starts looking exactly like this, mocap boxing on real hardware. Short of that, if you have any questions or comments, so leave them down below. That main builds on my Discord server, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.